Hey everyone, and welcome back to Volunteer Friendly. This is the podcast for folks that serve on Sunday mornings to make Sundays happen, whether you're a worship leader, a volunteer, musician, music director, production manager, creative director, whatever your role is. If you're involved in making Sundays happen in some capacity, this podcast is for you. My goal every week is to keep episodes less than 10 minutes. I've been struggling to do that because I've really enjoyed these topics recently. But the goal of the show is not to provide my personal ministry philosophy. It's not to interview famous worship leaders at famous churches. The goal is to just give you a question every week to chew on, to think, to contemplate. It's kind of the Socratic method of leading worship, if you will. Socratic method of being a production manager. It's really trying to ask the question, why do we do the things we do? Shall we stop doing them, start doing them? And a lot of times I try to turn the finger around and point it back at you. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. Today, I'm asking the question, do you have the freedom to say no? We'll break down what I really mean by that. This is something that I am not sharing from a perspective of mastering, but I'm sharing from a perspective of living through it. Not only am I a member, not only am I the president, I'm also a member of this struggle. Do you have the freedom to say no? Here's what I want to discuss today, and we'll really quickly get into these questions and wrap us up in less than 10 minutes. That's my goal. I promise I'm going to do it. I'm looking at the clock here. We could do it. So many times for me personally, I've been in situations where I felt like they were unhealthy. I felt like they're toxic, felt like someone was being unreasonable. My boss was being unreasonable. The people I'm working with being unreasonable. The workload that's being imposed on me is unreasonable. And in reality, I'm starting to get into my questions. I'm trying to stay away from them, but I feel like they really encapsulate kind of the outline for today. But in reality, it's less of a toxic environment. It's less of an unreasonable boss, and it's more of me not asking and communicating. Here's a perfect example. I'll give you a couple examples. One, I had a leader one time that I worked for that I was just super stressed out by the amount of things they were giving me, the amount of work. And one day they just very wisely said, listen, if I'm being unreasonable, just tell me. And if I'm being unreasonable, then we'll decide what's most important for you to do and we'll cut the rest. And I went, oh, okay. So you're not a jerk after all. It's just, I was afraid to speak up. I wasn't speaking into, or talking or communicating with you. And that was the issue, not necessarily you. I've had situations where, particularly when it comes to this kind of scenario where, I felt like a pastor was very unreasonable in I'm trying to say this kindly, nicely, the time frame in which they delivered their sermon notes and their expectations of what they expected the worship set to look like in regards to those sermon notes. And there was just tension. And I see that a lot. I used to see it more when I would teach at worship conferences, work for a worship resources company. I'd go and teach a lot of worship conferences. There's always this tension of like, my pastor delivers their sermon notes on Saturday, and then they expect the worship to match all the songs and blah, blah, blah. And often I would say, well, do they expect that, or have you put that expectation on yourself? And they would go, oh, yeah, that's right. They never once said the songs have to match the worship. And so I picked the title of Do You Have the Freedom to Say No? Kind of in the context of different scenarios. If your pastor delivers sermon notes and says, hey, can you write an original song for this Sunday, and it's Saturday? If you say, well, no, I actually don't have enough time, that feels a little unreasonable. Do you have that freedom in the relationship? And I would say 95% of the time we do, but we're afraid to ask. We're afraid if we say no, that we're going to get fired. We're going to get trampled on. If so, that's an unhealthy environment, right? We should probably leave or consider something else. Like, that's not a healthy place to be in. But more often than not, we do have the freedom to say no. More often than not, we do have the freedom to say, hey, I feel like you're being unreasonable here. Can you help me? If you just got done with Easter, you did 19 Easter services, Monday rolls around and they say, hey, we're going to have staff meeting. We want you to lead worship. Can you say, no, actually, I feel like I just need some time to rest, to be with my family, to see my kids. If they say, well, no, ministry is the most important thing, then you know you're probably not in the right place. But again, 95% of the time, that's not really the case. We just have lost our strength, our courage to say no, right? We still have the freedom to say no. We've just lost our strength and courage to do so. I hope that makes sense. Let me get to the questions because I think this is going to help this a little more. Again, if this is your first time listening to Volunteer Friendly or haven't listened in a while, every week I try to present 3 questions that the goal is to help you contemplate on your own and then discuss with your team. And I hope this is good information, particularly if you're a leader, bring this to your team. Gosh, the amount of buy-in you would get from them, the respect you would get from them to bring this to them and say, am I being unreasonable? Do you feel like you have the freedom to say no? One of the ways we try to help make it easier for you to do that, to contemplate on your own, discuss with your team, as we provide a PDF of 3 questions. This is old school, man. We're taking it back old school. I want you to kill some trees, print these out, write down your answers on your own, and then take this to your team and discuss with them. Share this printout before rehearsal, before sound check, in a staff meeting, whatever is the best context for you. Here we go. Okay. Number 1, this may be a little difficult if you're the boss, but ask this of your team, which is really good. Number 1, is your boss unreasonable or have you just not asked? And here's what I mean by that. Again, Saturday night, pastor gets you the sermon notes. Maybe when you got hired, they said, hey, I'd like the songs to match the sermon. So you still haven't picked songs. You've got your team members texting you going, when are the songs are going to be up? You're trying to respect the pastor and saying, sorry, it's taking longer than normal. You don't want to throw them under the bus, but under your breath, you're going, oh, this guy's such a jerk. He was just so unreasonable. Oh. Well, is your boss actually unreasonable or have you just not said anything? Have you just not asked and said, hey, is it possible to get your notes earlier? If it's super important for you to have songs that match the sermon, I really need to have songs before Thursday so that I can get them to the band to rehearse, so that we can then rehearse on Thursday so we can come into the weekend ready to go. Is it possible to get even just an outline, a basic idea? And the pastor may say yes, they may say no. And if they say no, then you go, well, I feel like it's just really difficult for us to match songs with the sermon. And you'd be surprised by the amount of times they go, okay, cool, that's fine. And you thought it was this core principle that they live their life by and that they cannot deal without, but you were just afraid to ask. So again, number 1, is your boss unreasonable or have you just not asked? Are they really, truly, beating you over the head, overworking you, or have you just not asked or just said no? Number 2, do you have the autonomy to say no? Do you have the space, control over your schedule to say, hey, I don't feel like I need to be at this meeting, and I feel like it's super important for me to get away, spend some time with my wife and kids before we head into the Easter season. Do you feel like you have the autonomy? And then maybe like a 2B, we're not going to put this on the sheet, but a 2B question to that would be, there's feeling and then there's reality, right? There's what you think and then there's actually reality. Maybe you feel like you don't have autonomy, but in reality you do. Or maybe you do feel like you have autonomy, but in reality you don't. Suss that out. Work through that. Do you have the autonomy to say no? Not do you really truly have that autonomy to say no in that space and that freedom? More often than not, I think you do. More often than not, I think we have more freedom and autonomy than we think. Number 3, what shifts can you make to make things easier? What shifts can you make to make things easier? Here's really what I mean about that. Again, you walk through, look at your schedule, look at the things that feel unreasonable that you're being asked to do. What are things you could do to make those easier? Again, I walked through that example earlier. That's maybe the best example I have is, hey, if we have to pick songs to match the sermon, we really need them before this date, this day of the week, so that I can get them to the team so they can prepare, so that then we can rehearse to then prepare for service. It would make it easier for me to get your outline on Monday. And the pastor would say, well, that seems really early. We just finished Sunday. And you go, well, can we get a week ahead with sermons? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. If not, then can you shift the expectation to say, we're just going to pick worship songs and we're going to roll with it as opposed to trying to coordinate them with the sermon. I hate to tell you, I've yet to find the book of third epistles that says, thou shalt do 4 worship songs that line up perfectly with the sermon. Yes, that's maybe a good practice. It's intentional and that's good. But if your leadership can't live up to that, if you can't live up to that, then don't do it. It's okay. So I hope these questions are beneficial. I hope you enjoy Volunteer Friendly. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what questions you would love to discuss. Let me know what things you're processing as a worship leader, as a production person. And I'm going to do a different ask here than normal. And we'll put up a lower third here, and then I may never do this ever again. But I'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, will@fromstudiotostage.com, will@fromstudiotostage.com. If volunteer friendly is beneficial to you and you're like, let's discuss this, let's talk about this, this is what we're working through as a team, I'd love to hear from you. So shoot me an email there. We'll put the link, not in the show notes, not in the description. We'll put it on the lower third there. So you got to really listen and pay attention. will@fromstudiotostage.com. Would love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening to this. I don't know what episode we're at. We're at the end of July now, but we've gone pretty far in volunteer friendly. This is super fun. I enjoy it every week. Thankful for the opportunity to speak to you guys, universal guys and girls, every single week. So thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.